Letitia James didn't enter the caf like someone with a title. She entered like someone with a target. No entourage, no sunglasses, no statement heels or press trail. Just a woman in a plain coat, a laptop under one arm, and the weight of New York State under the other. And that's the first thing people forget about Letitia. Beneath the sound bites and court orders, she walks alone because she can. That morning on Spring Street wasn't supposed to mean anything. Just caffeine, jazz, and a corner table. But if the devil were ever going to try something bold, it'd start right there with someone powerful enough to be worth warning. She chose her seat like a sniper picks a rooftop. By the window, diagonal to the door, back to the wall. No hesitation. Her order was automatic. Cappuccino, no sugar. Familiar. Disarming. The kind of order that says routine, even when nothing is routine. The barista, a young woman with a tight bun and the posture of someone watching two things at once, brought the cup out slowly. Her hands were steady, but her eyes too alert. She placed the cup on the table, slightly misaligned. Just enough to make you reach for it. Just enough to make you notice. Letitia noticed. Of course she did. But she didn't react, not with her face. She looked down like any customer might and found it. A slip of paper, folded once, tucked beneath the rim of the saucer. 3 words written in blood-red ink. Be careful. She blinked once. Nothing else moved. Not her shoulders, not her breath. Just a small nod, the kind you'd give to a well-made espresso or a bad joke on the news. No panic, no suspicion, just acknowledgement. A pause. Then a calm flick of her hand. Another one, she said, raising her fingers. Americano this time. The barista gave a small nod in return, like a move in a game they both suddenly knew they were playing. And there, right there, something shifted. Outside, pedestrians passed. Inside, jazz played. The caf was calm, but the center of gravity had changed and only 2 women in the room understood why. This wasn't a threat delivered with a bullet. It was a whisper dropped in daylight. One that said, "You're not alone," and someone wants that to change. Now, here's where most people would expect Letitia to pull out a phone or glance over her shoulder or call for backup. She didn't. Because Letitia James has stared down entire corporations, governors, even former presidents, and she knows the one thing they all fear more than exposure is a woman who doesn't flinch. So she didn't flinch. She reached for her laptop, unsnapped the clasp, typed 2 lines, and waited. This is the moment we begin with, not the aftermath, not the explosion, but the quiet, precise second where a warning lands in the lap of someone who knows exactly how deep the game goes. The note didn't say who, didn't say why, just 3 words. But when you're Letitia James, 3 words are all it takes to know. Somebody made a move, and now it's your turn. She didn't need to look. That's the thing with power, real power. It doesn't flinch at shadows or swivel its head like a rookie in a spy movie. No, it notices everything and reacts to nothing, at least not yet. So when the barista returned with the second drink, Letitia's voice was measured, mild, and terrifying in its composure. "Could I have a napkin?" she asked. Just that. Simple. But the request was a move on the chessboard. The girl nodded too quickly. Her gaze flicked almost involuntarily toward the back of the caf, toward him. A man who looked like he'd been stitched together from government files and forgotten favors. Ball cap, slouched posture, one hand under the table, the other pretending to be casual. His coffee sat untouched, which, fun fact, no New Yorker has ever done without being either dead or armed. And this one looked very much alive. Letitia didn't didn't need to. She already had the pattern memorized. He came in 2 minutes after her, sat 2 tables away. Right hand dominant, left pocket bulge, probable compact weapon. Hired help, most likely. The kind of man who calls women mom right before pulling a trigger on behalf of someone too cowardly to pull it themselves. She lifted the water glass and, with a motion as natural as breathing, spilled it directly across her white shirt. Not too much, just enough. A stain, not a scene. She stood, smiled like she'd dropped a spoon, and said evenly, "Restroom." The girl pointed wordlessly to the hallway. Again too fast. The rhythm was off. A person helping a stranger doesn't twitch like that unless they already know what that stranger is walking toward. Letitia walked, calm but calculating, each footstep a silent wager against someone else's plan. She passed the row of polished tile, the hallway lights flickering with the subtle paranoia of a cheap renovation contract. Her eyes caught every reflection glass, metal, even the chrome trim on the hand dryer. And there it was again. Movement behind her. Subtle. Intentional. The restroom door creaked as she pushed it open, but Letitia didn't go in. Not because she was afraid, but because fear is what they were counting on. She pivoted, not fast, just decisively. One hand brushed her damp blouse, the other nudged open a second door unmarked, weathered, slightly ajar. An exit. Of course there was a second way out. This was Manhattan. Every fire code violation in the city practically begged to be used for moments like this. She slipped through the side door and into the alleyway behind the cafe, leaving behind her coffee, her table, and the man who still hadn't touched his drink. He probably thought she was right where he wanted her boxed in. Predictable, routine. After all, that's how they saw women like her. Prosecutor, black, unflinching, and somehow still underestimated. Always underestimated. Because men like that, men with weapons and no imagination, didn't think someone like Letitia James could recognize a setup when she saw one. They forgot she didn't build her career by filing paperwork. She built it by walking into rooms full of men who thought they were untouchable and walking out with indictments, subpoenas, and the smug smirks of 10-figure egos wiped clean. This guy? He wasn't even clever. He was a pawn with a permit. The alley smelled like rain and garbage. Typical for downtown. But the silence was what stood out. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence you only get when something isn't happening that should be. A setup had been in motion. Someone wanted her boxed into that cafe. Cornered. Caught off guard. And if the note hadn't come from the barista, if it had come from someone with less theater and more timing, this might have ended very differently. But this wasn't their city. It was hers. Letitia didn't pause to gloat. She just adjusted her cuffs and walked deeper into the alley like she was headed to court. Which, in a way, she was. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And somewhere behind her, a man with a gun and a half-empty plan was still waiting inside a cafe that had just lost its lead actress. The play had changed. The script was broken. But Letitia, she had just exited stage left on her own terms. Now the real story could begin. Sunlight hit the alley like an interrogation lamp, harsh, direct, and not asking nicely. Letitia stepped into it, unbothered. Behind her, the cafe played dumb, as if jazz and caffeine could cover up the fact that someone just tried to make her a footnote in the next news cycle. The black SUV waited like a loyal secret, parked silent, engine warm. Marcus stood beside it, 6'4" of folded arms and zero tolerance. His bomber jacket creaked as he shifted his weight, eyes on her before she even closed the exit behind her. "Hez inside," Marcus said. "Walked in right after you left HQ. Didn't order. Didn't blink." Letitia nodded. "And the girl?" Marcus hesitated. "I haven't clocked her before." "She warned me," Letitia said flatly, brushing water off her shirt. "But warnings like that, they usually come with a receipt. And right on cue, the universe decided to add punctuation." Crash. The caf door slammed open behind them, that clumsy ballet of overconfidence and bad training. Marcus moved before the sound even ended, armed to the SUV, trunk popped, hand inside, stun gun out. The kind of precision you don't get from watching Homeland reruns. The man emerged. Sloppy draw, right hand under the jacket. Too slow, too predictable. Marcus dropped him with one shot. Clean. No theatrics. Just another amateur who thought standing near a coffee machine made him invisible. The weapon hit pavement with a hollow clack. The man hit harder. He was on the ground for less than 3 seconds before he found himself gagged, zip-tied, and shoved into the back seat like yesterday's garbage with a Glock problem. Letitia watched the whole thing, arms crossed, saying nothing. Because this was the easy part. The ridiculous part, that this was someone's idea of subtle. A botched tale in broad daylight, walking into a caf like he was hunting coupons, not a state attorney general. The sheer arrogance. As if Letitia James, the woman who took on Trump, the NRA, and half the real estate sharks in Manhattan, could be spooked by a man who couldn't finish a cup of decaf. She didn't ask who he was. Not yet. Because pawns don't matter until you know the board. Instead, she turned her head back toward the caf. Her voice was low, deliberate. "We've got a decoy," she said. "Someone paid for noise, not results, which means this guy's job was to get caught." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "To distract you?" "No," she said. "To test me." She held the note in her pocket like a poker chip she hadn't played yet. The words still rang. "Be careful. Not run. Not they're coming. Just cautious. Calculated. Like it came from someone who didn't want her dead. Not immediately, anyway." "She's the real question," Letitia said. "The barista." "You think she's with him?" Marcus asked. "I think she warned me too early," Letitia replied. "That's the part no one smart does. If she was trying to stop the plan, she would have waited, given me details, a reason. But she didn't. She gave me a whisper, not a lifeline. Which means she wanted me to survive just enough to wonder why." Marcus didn't answer. He knew that tone. It was the voice Letitia used right before she ripped through 3 years of legal red tape in a single press conference. She turned to him, more statement than question. "Find out who hired Mr. Discount Hitman." But first, she pointed her chin toward the caf window, where no one stood anymore. "I want her name, and I want to know why she's trying to save me from the very trap she helped set." It wasn't suspicion. It was certainty. The kind that comes when you've seen the same plot twist played out by different actors too many times. Letitia James didn't escape a hit. She walked into a rehearsal, and someone backstage had just slipped her the script. The curtain wasn't closing. It was just rising. Marcus wasn't gone more than 4 minutes, but in that time, the girl evaporated like a lobbyist's conscience, quick, clean, and with no forwarding address. No resignation, no records, not even a fake excuse scribbled on a napkin. She had been there. Now she wasn't. And in between, a surgical vanishing act that would have made Langley blush. "She's not on payroll," Marcus reported grimly. ID was fake. Cameras disabled, timed perfectly. Loop starts 20 minutes before you walked in. Of course it did. Letitia stood on the sidewalk, eyes locked on the cafe entrance like it might confess something if she stared hard enough. But buildings, like bureaucrats, are famously tight-lipped under pressure. She unfolded the slip of paper again, holding it like a confession the world hadn't earned yet. The ink was no accident. Red, heavy, not your average drugstore Sharpie. This was military grade, a polymer-based pigment issued only to, well, people with licenses to kill and training manuals with blood on the cover. She tilted the note toward the sun. The handwriting leaned left, subtly aggressive. A southpaw with tactical training, not some frightened waitress with a savior complex. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a chess move. And she'd just been cast as the queen in someone else's opening. Marcus's voice was low. Our guy spilled, said he was never meant to pull the trigger. Just get you to sit long enough. Letitia raised an eyebrow. Has the bait. So who's the hook? They both knew the answer. It was her. The barista. The ghost. The woman who had known exactly how to dance at the edge of exposure without ever stepping into light. She wasn't there to serve drinks. She was there to serve timing. Letitia exhaled, not with frustration, but with clarity. This wasn't some half-baked hit job from a washed-up D-lister with a grudge and a burner phone. This was orchestration. Precision. A psychological campaign disguised as a morning coffee. They wanted me comfortable, she muttered. They wanted me grateful. You let your guard down faster when you think someone's on your side. Marcus nodded grimly. The warning was the setup. She glanced down the street. And the kindness was the weapon. It would be laughable if it weren't so textbook. How many women in her position had been dismantled not with bullets, but with benevolence? The real art of the takedown wasn't violence. It was trust. Misplaced, manipulated, monetized. This wasn't about killing Letitia James. Not yet. It was about exposing her, making her predictable. Soft. A woman who listened to strangers and mistook notes for mercy. That was the story someone was trying to write. Fortunately, Letitia had never been fond of ghostwriters. She tapped the side of her temple. They think him still inside that calf. Marcus looked at her. Which means I have about 12 minutes before they realize I'm not. Her eyes narrowed. Lock down the block, pull transit footage, bank cameras, corner shops. I want every face between here and Canal Street. And when we find her? Letitia didn't smile. We ask who taught her how to write in blood ink, and who told her I was worth rehearsing for. No prints, no trail, no surveillance. But that kind of perfection? That wasn't fear. That was arrogance. And nothing makes a killer easier to catch than the belief they'll never be seen. The calf was quiet again. Tables reset, chairs back in place. A fresh pot brewing behind the counter like none of it ever happened. Letitia glanced once more through the glass. You know what gets me? She said, almost conversational. It's not the gun. It's not the timing. It's that she left behind exactly what she wanted me to find and nothing else. She wanted the chase? Marcus asked. No, Letitia said. She wanted the message. And that's the thing about silent threats dressed as favors. They don't vanish when the note disappears. They echo. And somewhere not far from that calf, someone was already writing the next line. Letitia James didn't disappear. She simply became something harder to aim at a rumor. While reporters breathlessly speculated about her sudden health scare, she was busy rewriting the script. Officially, she was resting after a possible poisoning incident. Unofficially, She was authoring her own resurrection. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. The hospital photos were pixel perfect. Letitia pale, IV hooked, surrounded by men in white coats who'd never graduated medical school but sure knew how to sign an NDA. The press devoured it, of course, because in America the only thing more seductive than power is weakness pretending to be real. Meanwhile, Marcus had been busy playing detective in places politicians like to forget exist: makeshift clinics, back-alley pharmacies, non-profit medical outposts, and zip codes that don't appear on campaign stops. And there, in a tiny brick building in the Bronx with a broken heater and flickering lights, he found her. The barista-turned ghost had returned. Not as a waitress this time, but as a nurse. A Florence Nightingale for the disenfranchised, draped in scrubs and the kind of anonymity that can only be manufactured by very rich men with very specific enemies. Letitia didn't alert tactical. She didn't order a perimeter. She just showed up. No motorcade, no blazer, just a brown coat, pulled hair, and a face that didn't blink. If they wanted her out of uniform, they'd get her on her own terms. The waiting room smelled like bleach and desperation. Cheap chairs, laminated signs, a television mounted to the wall playing yesterday's news. No one noticed when she walked in except one. Behind the intake counter, the nurse, the assassin, the actress, the warning in human form looked up, and their eyes locked. In that half-second, there was no pretending. No scripts, just two women, both too intelligent to act surprised. The nurse didn't reach for anything. Not a phone, not a panic button. She just inhaled slowly, like someone preparing to lose a hand of poker they never intended to play. Letitia walked forward, no smile, no greeting. Just presence, dense as gravity. She stopped at the counter, her voice low but lethal. "You've changed uniforms," she said, "but your handwriting's the same." The nurse gave the faintest shrug. "You read it, didn't you?" "Be careful" wasn't advice. "It was choreography," Letitia replied. "You wanted me to follow the beat. Now here we are." There was a long silence, thick, not awkward. "Strategic." Then the nurse leaned in slightly. "You weren't supposed to come here." Letitia's reply was immediate. "You weren't supposed to let me walk out of that calf." And there it was. The full confession, neatly sewn into a single moment of mutual recognition. This wasn't just a near miss. It was a performance. One rehearsed, staged, and still in progress. "I need to know who you're working for," Letitia said. "And don't insult me with the usual mythology cartel this, contractor that. You're too refined for freelance." The nurse's lips tightened. "I'm not working for anyone." "Then you're worse," Letitia said, voice sharpening. "You're working with them." That landed. A flash of something, pride, resentment, crossed the woman's face. But Letitia didn't press. Not yet. She stepped back from the desk, surveying the room as if it were a chessboard. "You know," she added, more to the air than to her adversary, "you're very good. Most people hide behind guns. You hide behind good deeds." The nurse didn't reply. Letitia tilted her head. "But if you're really that good, then you know what happens next. Because this wasn't a confrontation. This was a countdown. And somewhere, one of them had just run out of time." Letitia didn't ask for a blood pressure cuff. She didn't fill out a form. She sat down on the cold plastic chair across from the woman who, not long ago, passed her a handwritten death delay and called it mercy. The room was sparse, clean but not sterile, too quiet for a clinic. The kind of quiet that wasn't about peace, it was about no witnesses. Letitia folded her hands. No preamble. "If I was your target," she said calmly, "why the warning? A moment of weakness or part of the script?" The woman didn't flinch. Her accent surfaced like a fingerprint Eastern European, clipped, unapologetic, the kind of voice trained to give orders, not comfort. "I wasn't told to kill you," she said. "Just make sure you arrived at the right place, at the right time." Her eyes narrowed. "But when I saw you, I changed the plan. The directive didn't account for who you actually are." Letitia's eyebrow arched, unimpressed. "So, what you saw the humanity? The headlines didn't prepare you for the full experience?" The woman didn't blink. "The headlines made you look louder." Letitia let that sit for a beat, then exhaled, slow and exact. The tension in the room wasn't fear, it was clarity, because this wasn't a standoff. It was two women dissecting the roles they'd been assigned by people who thought they'd never meet like this, face to face, weaponless, without handlers to whisper the next move. Outside, Marcus stood by the hallway exit, earpiece live, hand near his coat. The signal was ready. He just needed one word from her. But Letitia said nothing. Not yet. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low and unforgiving. "I'm not going to thank you," she said. "You didn't save me. You stalled the process. You made sure someone else would finish the job." For the first time, the woman's gaze dropped. Not out of guilt, but calculation. And that was the tell. She wasn't second-guessing. She was trying to decide what Letitia already suspected. And then it came. "They're not just watching you," she murmured. "They're watching who you protect." Letitia's jaw tightened. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. That single sentence was a confirmation, not a confession. It wasn't personal. It was structural. A message sent through one woman and aimed at anyone in Letitia's orbit, any judge, prosecutor, or journalist who still believed public service didn't come with a price tag and a burial clause. Letitia stood. "No more riddles," she said. "Next time we sit across from each other, there will be no gowns, no clipboards, no courtesy." The woman looked up. "And what will there be?" "A warrant," Letitia replied, "and handcuffs." Her tone was final. Not performative, just fact. She walked toward the door, heels silent, spine straight. No hesitation. Because in a country where women like her are targets for sport and justice is seen as a negotiable inconvenience, Letitia James had no time for poetic tension. She had work to do, targets to flip, chains to follow. And for once, the assassin didn't reach for a weapon. She simply watched, because she understood perhaps better than her employers that the most dangerous woman in the room wasn't the one hiding behind a syringe. It was the one walking out with nothing in her hands and the law in her eyes. And that law had just found its next trail. 3 seconds. That's all the traffic cam gave them before someone wiped the feed clean. 3 seconds, and one frame, the grainy kind you'd usually toss out unless you knew what to look for. Marcus knew. So did his team. Zoom in, stabilize, enhance. Standard digital forensics routine, except this time they weren't chasing a license plate. They were chasing a ghost in scrubs. Their frame 91 of 120. A blurry figure slipping out the rear exit of an old Italian restaurant in Queens. Name, Ristorante di Calvino. Reputation, wood-fired pizza, overpriced Chianti, and a history with the kind of cash flow irregularities that make accountants cry and federal prosecutors twitch. Never charged, never closed. Just protected. Letitia didn't schedule a raid. She booked a reservation. If they wanted subtlety, she'd deliver it right to their back kitchen. When she walked through the front door, she was just another customer. unarmed, unassuming, unapologetically observant. The hostess smiled. The wait staff offered menus. The sommelier pushed a bottle with more markup than merit. But Letitia was there for the front-of-house charm. She was there for the steam, the sweat, and the secrets that always boiled in the kitchen. She excused herself after the second course, slipped through a swinging door with the confidence of someone who owned the building. And there, between the spice racks and the sauce-stained stovetops, she found her breadcrumb. A woman hunched over a steel prep table, sleeves rolled high, face slick with sweat. Looked up just long enough for Letitia to catch the curve of ink behind her left ear, sharp, jagged, and unmistakably familiar. The same mark the nurse bore, identical, subtle, but not small. Letitia didn't need a translator. It was a brand, not a tattoo, not art, a symbol of allegiance. And only one organization in this city left its fingerprints that deep, a Serbian syndicate that had figured out how to infiltrate systems not through violence, but through employment. You don't kick in doors anymore. You fill out W-2s. You don't shoot your way in. You staff the kitchen, the care center, the laundromat. You build credibility by blending in until the moment you need to disappear. Letitia stood still for just long enough to let the truth settle. Then she turned to Marcus, who had followed her in the moment she crossed the freezer threshold. "They're not targeting me," she said. "They're building infrastructure." He nodded. "We've got faces, timestamps, but no real names. The whole staff checks out as clean, or rather, scrubbed." Letitia's voice dropped to a whisper laced with disgust. "They're hiding in the basements of the city, places too poor to matter, too overlooked to regulate. The city thinks it's feeding itself, healing itself. Meanwhile, these people are feeding them right through the pipes. And it made sense. Of course it did. You don't challenge the state anymore. You service it. You hide your networks in the exact places the government won't bother auditing, because who has the time to investigate a line cook?" Letitia narrowed her eyes. "We thought the hit was the story. It wasn't. That was the introduction. This wasn't a hit job. It was a rollout, a soft launch for a criminal enterprise that had learned how to speak bureaucratic." Letitia stared through the steam toward the woman with the ink. She wasn't armed. She wasn't scared. She just kept chopping parsley like nothing outside that kitchen existed. But Letitia knew better. When crime learns to cook, it no longer needs guns. It just needs aprons and invisibility. And it had both. For now. Letitia James knew better than most that the real crime in New York rarely happened on dark streets. It happened in well-lit offices, under fluorescent lights, with good coffee and better excuses. So, when she opened the 2018 file marked inactive, she didn't expect drama. She expected dust. What she found was rot. The case was a cold one, or rather, frozen, buried deep beneath layers of procedural jargon and bureaucratic delay. The murder of a bakery owner in the Bronx. Shot twice. Execution style. No forced entry. No robbery. Eyewitnesses described a woman with a faint Eastern European accent and no fingerprints. The bakery burned down 2 days later. Accidental fire, they said. At the time, it was unresolved. Then under-resourced, then quietly closed, and the assistant district attorney assigned to the case. Now chair of the City Budget Oversight Committee. Isn't that charming? Letitia stared at his file photo, grinning, suited, shaking hands with the mayor in front of a Rebuilding Our City banner, and felt her stomach harden. "Marcus," she said, "track campaign contributions. Look for any bounce-back routing numbers, offshore linked entities, anything flagged by Treasury after 2020. 2 hours later, Marcus returned with a map, not of streets, but of money, lines traced across Serbia, Hungary, Croatia, back into Brooklyn. Not through violent smuggling or cartel wire fraud, no, through COVID relief funds. American tax dollars intended for ventilators and rent support. $38.4 million funneled cleanly through fake contractors and non-profit shells with names like Urban Rise and Hope Track Inc. Letitia didn't blink. She leaned over the printout and pointed to a cluster of names marked recipients. Most were unknown, but one wasn't. A former staff attorney from her own office. Left quietly. No misconduct, no drama. Just pursuing opportunities in the private sector. Well, Letitia muttered, he found one. The betrayal didn't sting. She was long past expecting loyalty. What disturbed her was the elegance of it, the patience. This wasn't brute force infiltration. It was slow poisoning. Drip by drip. Hire the intern, win the assistant, fund the committee, and by the time you feel the symptoms, the entire system is already septic. She sat back in her chair and stared at the wall, not because it held answers, but because it was the only thing that hadn't lied to her yet. They didn't just hire assassins, she said. They hired trust, and not cheaply. They bought the benefit of the doubt, bought blank resumes and fake reputations, bought people who understood that New York politics doesn't reward virtue, it rewards discretion. You don't need to threaten Letitia James with a bullet. You just need to surround her with smiling faces and empty folders. People who file clean paperwork and pass background checks. People who learned that the best way to kill an investigation is to shake the hand holding the subpoena. Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Letitia stood. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to pierce drywall. If they're this deep, she said. We're not dealing with corruption. We're dealing with occupancy. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a colonization. And the city didn't even know it had been captured. There's a special kind of silence that follows a raid, not the relief of victory, but the pause before you process what you've actually stepped into. And when Letitia James walked into the warehouse of Rinaldi Bros Logistics, she didn't find forklifts or invoices. She found a war room. Officially, Rinaldi Bros was a humble transport company. Blue-collar branding, a logo with a truck and a flag, and a long-standing contract to deliver legal documents between the city's courts. Very civic, very dependable. Unofficially, it was a tomb built to bury truth. The back of the warehouse held a steel door, sealed with a biometric scanner, completely illegal, of course. Letitia had it torched open within minutes. Inside was a soundproof chamber. No windows, no ventilation, just machines. Hard drives humming, walls lined with high-resolution screens. And on those screens, faces. Rows of them. 20 profiles. Maybe more, each tagged with data. Locations, routines, aliases. These weren't enemies of the state. These were journalists, prosecutors, retired agents, people with a bad habit of asking questions. And then she saw it. Center row, second monitor from the right. Her own photo. A candid shot, blurry, low angle, taken from across the calf where it all began. Her profile partially turned. A red line scrawled across it. Beneath the image, process within 7 days. Not kill, not neutralize. Process. Because this wasn't street-level crime. This was bureaucracy for blood. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just pulled out her phone and dialed. I need a special committee convened tonight. No clerks, no press, no calendar invite. Marcus stood beside her, his voice low but real. You go in there without backup, without noise. You'll have no shield if they push back." Letitia turned slowly toward him, her face hard with resolve. "No one's coming to save me if I'm wrong," she said. "But if I'm right and say nothing, then I've already surrendered." That's what they never understood about Letitia James. She wasn't built for self-preservation. She was built for exposure, for that brutal, unwelcome thing called accountability. And right now, accountability had just found its next address. She looked again at the wall of photos, at the dossiers arranged like trophies. It wasn't rage in her eyes. It was recognition. Because this wasn't surveillance. It was targeting. Every person on that list had stood in the way of someone else's profit. Every name had once written, ruled, or revealed something inconvenient. And now they were marked for processing. Letitia stepped forward and pulled the drive from the core server, handing it silently to Marcus. "Chain of custody," she said. "Direct to me." He nodded. No one else would touch it. And that was the terrifying irony. In a city with thousands of employees, agencies, auditors, there was no one else she trusted not to sell it for political favor or lose it in a bureaucratic accident. Letitia looked around one last time before exiting the chamber. No dramatics. No warning to those who'd built this digital kill list. Just a cold, calculated move. One phone call, one committee, one night to decide whether justice still had breath left in it. And somewhere in that silence, she knew. This wasn't about her anymore. They were burning the system from the bottom up, and if no one stepped in soon, the fire would reach the courthouse walls. Not in theory, in practice. The room wasn't just secure, it was fortified. One of those government chambers where the walls are thicker than the morality of half the people who've sat inside them. No phones, no aides, no press, just Letitia James, a table, a stack of evidence, and the city's so-called oversight committee staring back like they expected a briefing and not a bomb. She didn't begin with pleasantries. She placed a folder on the table. Slowly, deliberately, each item inside was a nail in someone's legacy. "Here's your real infrastructure bill," she said flatly. Screens lit up with bank transfers, tens of millions funneled through fake nonprofits. A chain of shell companies stretching from Brooklyn to Belgrade. Surveillance logs, death lists, payroll stubs for people who didn't exist. And then came the photos targets with red lines across their names, hers included. But it wasn't the data that silenced the room. It was the paper she placed next, old, folded, slightly worn. "Be careful," it read. She looked up. "I used to think it was a warning. I was wrong. It was an entrance exam." A committee member scoffed. "You're accusing half the city's departments of collusion?" Letitia met his gaze without blinking. "No," she said. "I'm unlocking a door you've all been pretending wasn't there." And that's when it began outside. The murmurs, the camera crews clustering near the lobby, the press leaks. The story had cracked containment. Someone inside the building had whispered just enough to the outside world to light a fuse. And then, boom. Not figurative. Literal. A blast rocked the western wing of the courthouse. Dust and chaos followed. The room shook, sirens wailed. Marcus reached for his earpiece, already moving. "Storage facility," he said grimly. "Our off-site archive." Letitia stood, unmoved. She turned to him, voice calm. "I never trusted the building," she said. "I sent the original to someone they'd never suspect." And she meant it, because Letitia James didn't play chess. She played Cold War. The room descended into motion. Officials whispered into secure phones. Some ducked. One bolted. She didn't stop them. because the blast wasn't meant to destroy the truth. It was meant to erase doubt, and it failed. 3 hours later, security footage showed Letitia exiting City Hall. No speech, no press scrum, just the slow, steady walk of someone who had already decided her next move before the explosion ever happened. Under her arm was a frame. Inside it, the same old piece of paper, now matted and sealed behind glass. Be careful. The message hadn't changed, but the woman holding it had. She stepped into her car, eyes forward, hands steady. There was no need to speak, because when someone tries to blow up your evidence, they're not just confirming you're right. They're begging you to stop, and she wouldn't.